Hi guys, welcome back. So this video is about research for USMLE. And many of you have asked me the question of how I went about doing research for USMLE. So I decided to put together this video which is pertinent to whatever level of training you're at. So let's dive right in. If you're a first year medical student and you're dealing with anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, you're wondering what should I do with these subjects? Unfortunately, they are a little stagnant and there might not be a lot of dynamic ongoing research which you could be a part of, but you could definitely do workshops in either of these subjects to give you something to put down on your resume from your first year itself. You can also at this time just get used to a medical school, maybe engage in some extracurricular activities that also form a part of your resume and are maybe not as but also pretty important to do. So that is what you can do for first year, but when you're a second year student and you have subjects like pharmacology, pathology, microbiology, I will say you have way more opportunity to do something which is more effective and long-term in your second year. I engaged in research in microbiology where I would go to a lab and try and work on these specimens. Although that didn't go a very long way and I couldn't take it to completion, but if you have an attending who you would like to work with, or if you have a subject that interests you, go for it. Pharmacology is another one which provides you with all these new and active therapies and medications, and research for that could be based in your med school or at an industry nearby. So it could be worthwhile reaching out to your professor or to a liaison about what you can do as a medical student in that ongoing active research. So these two subjects are fertile soil for doing something more interesting to you as well as long-lasting. The real story though begins when you're a third year medical student. At that point, you can start either figuring out things with your final year subjects, with medicine, with surgery, with orthopedics, with OBGYN, or you could just focus on subjects from your third year. And I will say that was one place where I could have done things a little better. If you're in India, you would be reading a subject called community medicine or preventive and social medicine, where biostats is a big part of the entire curriculum for PSM. And I did not read biostats in that depth and detail when I was a third year student, but you should definitely make an effort to understand it then. And I will say, if you're able to get a hold of New World biostatistics when you're a third year medical student, you'll be preparing for both step 1, step 2, and step 3, because the same questions are asked again and again and again, and you will develop an understanding for doing clinical research in your third year. So your third year is really the time where you have to cement your understanding of biostatistics, and B, look at subjects which interest you. Are you a surgical person or are you not? If you are a surgical person, try looking for what the residents are doing in terms of their own thesis and whether you can be a part of any of those ongoing. You might be a second or a third author if you are dealing with some resident-based project, but that would at least teach you ways of doing something. But if you are more ambitious and you can work with an attending one-on-one, that will have a much longer lasting impact, and you could use your biostats knowledge to apply into a project which could be, say, collecting blood specimens from all your patients and seeing vitamin D levels and correlating that with maybe osteoporosis. So all these things, all the questions that otherwise seem simple and maybe even obvious, but have maybe not been addressed in your subcontinent or in your area of expertise, and you could try and be a part of those projects. So third year is when you really need to start thinking about what you want to do with life and pick up a project which takes you a long way, and keep doing that in your final year. I will say final year becomes a little tricky because your subjects themselves are huge and you want to excel at the medical knowledge part of it. So if you start a project early, just continuing it is not as hard as trying to start something as a fourth year student. Although one thing that you can do and you should always be on the lookout for as a third year, fourth year and onwards is case reports. The good thing about being in a country like India where there's a giant population that you see every day is that you see so many different kinds of unique cases that writing up a case report should become your second habit by the time you come to the States because you've seen so many cases. So be on the lookout, have an open mind for case reports because they're easy to write, they are fairly easy to publish, although not always, and they're good for training you towards how to write papers and how to think about them. All this while, all through your med school, I will say whenever you're reading a topic, try and look at a review article or try and maybe read a new journal article because that will also help you understand as you're reading biostats on how the people actually implement it out in the big world. Internship in India, which is technically your final year rotations, is when you start thinking about coming here for electives and going about a new phase of your training. Now coming on to what you should be doing if you are here in the US. So it's kind of similar that you can work on case reports and look out for projects that allow you to collect data. But I will say it becomes a little hard because electives are about 1 to 2 month experiences and taking a project to completion becomes hard. But one crucial part of your electives will be to identify potential mentors for future phases of research. So that is the same story with me and my colleagues who did more research between med school and residency, was that we identified PIs at this time. So how do you approach a PI? How do you know who to approach? So you have to be on the lookout for anybody who is doing something in your field of interest. It could be cardiovascular, it could be oncology. You have to identify the person. And when you search them on the university website, if they have a new grant or an ongoing spot that they have advertised, you will be able to see that for much of the larger universities. They have websites where they publish this data. But you should try and then either arrange for a meeting with them by asking maybe the attending you're working with during the elective to put in a word for you, or maybe just email them and see. Or if they're giving a talk at some place, maybe try and reach out to them there and express interest in their lab. If they have a spot and you are a good medical student, then more often than not, they'll be willing to give you a chance and they'll be willing to call you for an interview. And at that point, you can say that you really want to do this and you're doing this because you want to do research and not because you want it to look good on your resume. There is a difference between the two attitudes towards research, so I will say go with the former. So that is what I did. I reached out to my PI whose work I had read about when he was giving a conference talk, and I asked him that if he has a spot, I would love to do whatever his lab can train me to do. And fortunately for him, he did have a spot. It was a paid spot. I will say paid research is hard to get because it depends on your luck and the PI's current standing. But that worked out for me, and I did a whole year of bench research. So that bench research was really a lot about cloning and biochemical work, which was hard. And the learning curve is extremely steep with bench research because you haven't been trained to do most of the things. You could have that medical knowledge, but it doesn't really apply when you're trying to do bench. But I will say there is really nothing that is as satisfying as results from a bench research. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about clinical research in the States. If you're planning on doing any sort of clinical research, you should invest some time in training yourself in one of the programming languages. A lot of people choose R, programming, because that seems to be a bit easier to understand, while others might get trained in Python. Either way, people who are able to train themselves in those languages publish heavily. And I have a lot of colleagues who published about 5 to 10 papers in their 3 years of clinical research because they were so well versed with these languages. I unfortunately couldn't finish training myself in any of these languages and had to be reliant on biostatisticians to help me along the way. So you could be self-reliant and get better experience and more papers out of your clinical research experience, because clinical research is largely data-driven. Existing data that you use, and you put together a content and a clinical question and you answer that. So it is extremely good for your resume to be engaging in some period of clinical research. Although these are hard to come by, these spots are few and far in between, but the ones that exist will take you a long way, at least in terms of your publication value. So if you have any questions about all that I went through or anything that comes up in your mind, leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and address them as quickly as possible. And if more videos are needed to address that, I'm happy to make them in the future. Bye guys, have a good day and or a good night. See you all.